So I think my process is divided into maybe two. So there is a physical process, which happens at the end. So I'm starting my answer back to front. But for instance, if I am doing a very large scale embroidery, it will be based on a particular concept. And I would then photograph or draw on paper, which would then be printed onto fabric, and we would then stitch. The process of making art for me changes all the time, but it does definitely start with my emotions, with how I'm feeling, and often it then starts with the reaction, which is caused by this very uncomfortable, almost always uncomfortable feeling, because the work is rooted in activism. It's a way of me shouting, it's a way of me communicating, it's a way of me begging and saying, please listen. And so it's this yearning that then kind of changes into a visual language, because if I just stand on top of my house and say, listen to me, no one's gonna come. I've tried. So what happens then, I can speak in reference to my first body of work with I Am Royal, is that my children started school, and I felt that they were incredibly ignored out of the schooling system. I felt that there was no representation of who they were, and they had no sense of belonging in the school. And for me, I had to send my kids to school every day, and them coming home and not feeling as though anything they were taught included who they were. And I decided then to write a new history for them by making I Am Royal. And this to them was a visual representation of the history which I know puts them back into the landscape of South Africa and especially Cape Town. And this was a gift to them, so that they know that they have contributed and that their ancestors have contributed and that they are Cape Town. And so now they go to school thinking that they're royal. I thought very much into it, and I thought photography for me was very important because it was about the representation of who we are, and visually and literally putting myself into that landscape. I then put everyone that looks like me back into those spaces, and I follow the trajectory of our ancestors from the very first people who were brought to the Cape, and I follow each space, and I go back to each space around Cape Town as we were moved from one space to another under different political regimes. But what it also shows in this particular series is how we change as people and how we become indigenous to this space, because we become a new type of people. So we are no longer Indonesian. So this idea of going back to Indonesia, where our ancestors come from, is not possible, because we are not Indonesian, we are South African, we are Cape Townian, and we are African, and we are Creole, and we belong in this space. And through changing this, and through the changing of the costumes, it shows the mixing and creolization of everyone, indigenous and foreign, that had come to South Africa, that has now resulted in who we are. For some other work, my later work, I use a lot of embroidery and thread, and that's a whole different process, because often I photograph things, or I draw drawings which I then photograph and print onto fabric, and we work over the actual drawings, which is now on fabric. And through this, it gives me, it's like a canvas, and I can paint, but I paint with thread. But also the idea, the slowness, you know, it's so slow and consistent to work with thread. It also gives you time for reflection and time for change and time for meditation, because the lovely and the most beautiful thing about making art is that we can change our mind. It is a process, and you're not fixed to anything. It's not like you're writing a fact. There are no facts, because our emotions are fluid, and everything speaks to that spirit and that emotion within yourself. And this is a language that belongs to your inner being. So as you change yourself, your art will change with you. And don't ever be like, you don't ever have to be like confined and rigid. Just be loose and free, because there's no rules. And I approach my work in that way.